last year.
Hi, Jim, Carolyn, good to see you.
Everybody, how are you?
Great.
Good.
Your arm is out of the cast.
It's doing really well.
Yes, you drive.
Welcome back.
You drive now?
I can drive now.
Excellent.
Yes. So,
Hey, dear Carolyn.
hello, Rabbi. How are you, dear?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Did you get busted yesterday?
No, I didn't have to come get me. But when the woman was announcing, the woman from Santa Alaska had the Walmart, she said, we do not have a permit, we need to follow every, like all the walking laws, all the street laws, because we don't have a permit. So she did announce it. No, I didn't get one, we didn't have to come get jail. Yeah, I know. I guess that's good, I've never been to jail. Thought about it one time. It was the same weekend that, this five, the master garden shop with 5 kids, we had a march in DC. I got to DC and then in camp on night, one of the people were telling us about tear gas, about being arrested. I got on a city bus, and we should get out. Mary Washington, Virginia, and I went for a short period of time. I was in Salt Lake, I had a semester in DC, so I went for a semester in summer, and then through the semester. Oh, Mary, mine was 75 miles south, so we just marched up. Route 1, Route 1.
You're always fingers.
He started the live stream.
Hey, see you. A little humps of cup, but nothing dramatic.
I know there's a lot of pieces and parts.
Hanging out with Ray. That's something else. Yeah. They're kind of good together. Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah. Together? Really? That's nice. There we go. Yeah.
When's the last time you really able to look into your mind? Or is it just pushing your way to say,
Yeah, cool. Yes, great. Last time I got the there, and he usually have to come back and hang on again, so we're meeting first, I come back with it. Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah.
really know Jonathan. He's a lot of that. You know, right? Like, he definitely has like.
Hey y'all, we're gonna get started in about 5 minutes, okay? 5-minute warning. All right, y'all, we're gonna get started. What was that? Hey y'all, before you begin, I'm going to offer a prayer, okay? And it goes like this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kisha mitzvotav v'tivan la'asok b'tzarchei tzibor. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has consecrated us with your commandments, and commanded us to occupy ourselves with the needs of the community. I want to welcome you. If you're visiting here, I'm Rabbi Abram Goodstein. This is Congregation Beth Shalom, and to our normal members, welcome. I'm glad that you're here this Sunday afternoon. I'm going to say a few things first, and then I'm going to invite our speakers to say a few things after that. Before I forget, I want to tell you about two upcoming events we have. This upcoming Thursday is our Purim celebration, which will start at 6 p.m. We're going to have, it's called Heroic Purim, so please bring your hero costume if you could. There will be a costume contests for both grown-ups and kids with your hero costume. And we will also be having our drag performers perform the story of Esther for us, like we did last year. It was so fun last year. We're doing it again this year. We'll have 3 to 5 performers here to do that. So please come. That's March 9th, right? Today's March 9th. It's March 13th. 13th, thank you. That's our board president, by the way, who's on it. March 13th at 6 p.m. right here at Beth Shalom. And the other program that we're organizing in the near future is our, what we're calling our Science Fair for Everybody, which I believe will be on April 6th. Let me see if I can get... where, I don't know. Okay, April 6th, Science Fair for Everybody. We are organizing a science fair right here at Congregation Beth Shalom for kids of all ages, and there'll be a lot to do. We're working with UAA a bit on this as well, and there'll be signups starting sometime this week for it. So we'll be announcing it more this week with advertising stuff like that. So those two things, please keep those on your calendars. We got more things coming in the near future as well. We'll keep you updated about that. Anyways, I really want to talk a little bit about the purpose of this community symposium. I happen to believe that we're all dealing with a lot, and that processing requires a number of things. It requires time, it requires effort, most importantly, it requires community. That to process these events that we're experiencing right now, we must do it together. Secondarily, I believe it's really important now to build coalitions. Broad coalitions are really important in a time like this. And this helps what I call just general resilience, personal resilience, what's happening, and organizational resilience. And so we need to come together as often as we can, process what's going on, and understand the best way to move forward. And the best way to move forward is to have real-time information that helps us navigate misinformation and also misunderstanding, which is why I have this panel here today to help us with that. And so I've asked this panel to help understand what Trump's administration's policy changes and his executive orders mean, both for, in the big general way, for the U.S. and for our local Alaska community. And I really hope this community symposium model that we're using today will engender or motivate us to have more symposiums in the future, maybe here or even somewhere else. And if you have any ideas of speakers who you want to hear from, let me know, and I'll invite them here to talk. So anyone who you want to have speak, I would like to invite them to come here and talk to us during these symposiums. And then finally, I want to remind you that we can't experience all these hard news without good food to eat. So afterwards, I really want you to stick around and enjoy the comfort food that I've asked everyone to bring. If you go to the kitchen, you're going to see we've got a lot of it there. So please stick around. Let's chat with each other. Let's talk. Let's eat. We've got lots of tables around here to sit around. So I really encourage you to stay and to fill your bellies and chat about what's going on. All right, and then the next thing I want to do is give you a Jewish update of what the Jewish community is experiencing right now, and both in a broad sense and specifically for our community. And the one thing that I am most worried about as a rabbi is I'm worried about the FBI. The Jewish community relies heavily on that agency. And the FBI is an organization where if they're doing their job right, you don't know they're doing their job at all. And so if the FBI is no longer committed to public safety, I feel that's a big problem for vulnerable communities. Now, I've called them up. Here at CBS, we have a good relationship with the FBI field office in Anchorage, and they've assured me that they're still committed to public safety, which I'm glad to have heard, but I was not thrilled to learn that they are working with immigration enforcement. And my fear is that they'll be focused on that and not on public safety. But they seem to think that that's going to be fine there too. Myself and a delegation of board members went and talked to Murkowski's office. We talked to Karina Waller, their Murkowski State Director, and we have notes on that conversation right here, so anyone who wants to come by and see them, we have them. We'll also send them out to our community as well via email, so you can hear that conversation. And we talk about the FBI in that conversation as well, and so we know that Senator Murkowski has been flagged with that issue through our community. And then the other thing that I'm really worried about is the rise of Christian nationalism. It's a problem. Christian nationalism during Trump's original 4 years grew quite a bit, and we fear it'll grow even more now. And we're still trying to quite understand these two components of it, which is the Anti-Christian Bias Task Force and the White House Faith Office. We don't know what those are. We don't know. We don't think the Jewish community will be invited to these things, and we don't think our Jewish voice will be heard. And so we're still trying to figure that kind of stuff out. So that's sort of like my quick report about how the Jewish community is feeling, how we feel that what's going on. But I'm really excited to introduce our speakers here. The format is going to be each speaker is going to talk for about 20 minutes. Then we'll offer about 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. If you can't get to your question, I think they've agreed to all stick around for a little while. So you can find them later and ask them then. So we have 3 great speakers here. We've got Mary Kimmel, who is the executive director of the ACLU and a community member of ours. So really excited to have Mary here. Thank you. We have Rose O'Hara-Jolly here. Rose is the state director of the Planned Parenthood. And we've got Joelle Hall here, the president of the AFL-CIO. So thank you so much for being here. We all really appreciate it. Yeah. And I'm going to invite up Mary first to speak.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk to all of you. It's great to be back here. It's been a little while, sorry. I will make that better. Little Jewish guilt. I'm going to talk to you today about the impacts of this administration on a specific sector and a segment of our community, the immigrant and refugee community. And I'm doing that for a couple of reasons. One is because I feel like that community in particular resonates with the Jewish community, which I'll talk about sort of at the end of my comments. But also I think that it's really been a canary in a coal mine, seeing the assaults that Trump has been making and these series of executive orders, which I'm also going to just mention, and watching what's happening there. The ACLU nationally has taken on a commitment of preventing and trying to deal with mass deportation because, again, they feel that this issue in particular is really warrants our opposition and our continued vigilance, because what we can do to immigrants, we can do to others. So just keep that in mind as I'm going through the more particulars about the immigrant and refugee community. And I am going to talk to you a little bit about what that community looks like in Alaska, because it's a big community here, as we all know. So 3 ideas I wanted to share with you just to kind of frame my comments today. The first, hopefully, will sound familiar, because to me it's one of my most cherished cultural values, which is to question authority. I can tell by the murmurs in the room. Good job. The second is to be proactive. And Tim Snyder, I'm going to be quoting from a little bit today, but one of his 20 steps to preventing tyranny is don't obey in advance. Very, very important and very scary. And then the third thing I'm going to talk about is to create conditions for kindness. And I'll be drawing a lot on some of my experiences leading the Welcoming Anchorage initiative here in our community and what we can do to hopefully get back to that. So I also want to share some thoughts with you about what the ACLU of Alaska is doing on this and urge you to get engaged in a few different ways that we can talk about. So in terms of questioning authority, I once found a pin, my best friend gave me a pin that says, "Question authority, but not your mother," which I really appreciate. My mom taught me that so much, that's how I grew up, is make sure you're asking for more. Don't just take things at face value. Continue to push. And I don't think that's ever been more important than it is right now. We're getting a whole lot of information. We're also getting a whole lot of mis and disinformation. And so it is really, really important for you. And I think the rabbi just emphasized this, and this is the purpose in pulling these symposiums together, is we need information and we need to educate ourselves. We have to know the facts. We can't fall prey to sound bites. And so in the context of immigration, this is critical. Because immigration, I've done a lot of social justice work. Immigration is one of the most complex areas of social justice work I've ever encountered because it's incredibly intersectional. And if you just look at the numbers of folks in our community in Alaska, you'll recognize that we, whether we know it or not, are touched by the fates of our neighbors and our family members who are non-citizens or who came here as immigrants or refugees. I counted, there are at least 11 different types of immigration status that you can have, which includes being a US-born citizen. I'm just gonna list the types that I know of, and I'm sure that there's more. You can be a naturalized citizen. You can be a lawful permanent resident, which means you have a green card. You can be here on an employment visa. We see that all the time, J visas, people who work in our restaurants, in our stores, in tourism industries, and increasingly in Anchorage and Alaska, like the rest of the United States, the school districts are starting to turn to J visas to bring in educators because we don't have them. We've got people who are here on temporary protected status, people who are here on humanitarian parole, people who are here without documents, and that means a couple of different big buckets of folks. So it could be somebody who came into the US perfectly lawfully, but then their visa expired, or it could be somebody who entered the United States at a point where there wasn't a checkpoint, where there wasn't a formal entry process. And there are a lot of those folks also in Alaska and in the United States. We have kids in our state who were brought here very, very young, didn't even realize most times that they weren't born in the United States until it was time to go get a driver's license and their parents had to break it to them that in fact, you are not a US citizen, you are not eligible to get a driver's license, you can't work. Those kids are here under what's called DACA, or Deferred Action on for Childhood Arrivals. We have about 70 DACA kids in Alaska. We've got refugees, we've got asylees, there is a difference between the two. We've got crime victims, we have trafficking victims. We have so many different flavors of ways to come to the United States, and that's really also important to know to fight this misinformation, because one of the myths about immigration is just get in line. Just, my grandparents emigrated lawfully, you should too. Well, there's really no lines to get into. It's a really, really convoluted process. And in terms of like people's ancestors coming to the US lawfully, we didn't even have an immigration system in the United States until the 1950s. You know, I come from people who showed up on Ellis Island. They didn't apply for anything beforehand. They just fled and they got here by hook or by crook. And that's generally the way that a lot of folks, my generation, their ancestors got here. The other piece of misinformation that's floating around out there, which is really dangerous, is that people who are here in the United States are criminal. That's so problematic for so many reasons. Looking even just at the language, criminal alien, what is that? And it's really important to understand that even if you're here without documentation, even if you're one of those undocumented folks I just referenced, the fact of your presence in the United States is not an ongoing crime. It is a violation, yes, of our civil laws, but it is not a criminal behavior to be here. And so to send the FBI, to send ICE, to send the state troopers to people who are here committing a civil violation, if you can think about it in the same way, would we send this level of law enforcement out to enforce tax law? That's the equivalent of the violation that people are committing when they're here without legal status. In terms of immigrants in Alaska and non-citizens in Alaska, the numbers are pretty big. Overall, 8% of our statewide population are people who are foreign-born. That amounts to about 55,000 people in Alaska. Even more than that, though, 31,000 Alaskans have a parent who's foreign-born. That's a lot of people. I don't know what the Venn diagram is there, but let's say between 50 and 80,000 Alaskans who are directly impacted by some of the draconian policies that are coming out of DC. It's a lot of us. If we go with the high number, that's more than 10% of our state's population. So many of our families and friends are at risk right now. There are 30,000 foreign-born Alaskans who are naturalized citizens, which means that they are eligible to vote. And there's 10,000 more who are able to naturalize, which means one day they will also be eligible to vote. And most recently, our numbers of folks who we've been resettling as refugees has risen from about 30 in years past to over 1,000. And we know why. It's the Ukrainians, it's the Afghanis, it's also Haitians, Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And all of those folks are being assisted by Catholic Social Services through the Refugee Assistance and Immigration Services Program. A great speaker, by the way, if you haven't gotten her in here yet. She can talk in much more detail about the impacts on the refugee community that these policies are taking. So it's just really, really important to know that even by the numbers, the impacts of what's going on are stark and pretty devastating. But there's so much light to be had if we just opened ourselves up to what immigrants and refugees, what non-citizens bring to our community. In Anchorage, during the welcoming Anchorage heyday, we love to brag about how many different languages are spoken in our streets and in our schools, right? Over 100. Think for a minute about the power of that. Think for a minute about the power of linguistic diversity on top of our geographic location. We are at the center of the globe. We may be far up north, but if you tilt the globe on its axis, we are at the center. We are equidistant from Japan to Washington, D.C. Our global trade potential, just geographically alone, is huge, but add in those languages, we have amazing potential. If you think about the consumer spending power that non-citizens bring to our state, it's almost $2 billion. And that's with people who are not employed at their highest levels of employability. I'm sure that each and every one of you has a story about getting into a taxi cab being driven by a doctor from another country. Think about, again, the bump up in consumer spending power we could experience if we just had better policies that integrated more fully people's skills and experiences into our state. We are leaving money on the table at a time when we can absolutely not afford that. And not only that, but think about the cultural richness that we have in our communities. Look at all the restaurants now that have sprung up, the food opportunities that we have, the ways that we are interacting with one another. Again, diversity is a beautiful thing. It makes us stronger, it makes us resilient. It is not a dirty word. And it is incumbent upon all of us to embrace it, and to embrace and understand its true meaning, especially for our city and our state. So that brings me to point number 2, be proactive. Don't obey in advance. There's a ton of fear out there. And we see this all the time. We see this in the way that people and institutions are behaving. We see this in funders fleeing and running away, philanthropies turning away from the nonprofits that they supported. We see this even in our local university system with their recent decision about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and now all of a sudden we have a CEP program instead of an ANCEP program. We are afraid. And that means that we have to stand up for each other. I also want to call out Sarah Chirac here because her employer recently was the subject of an executive order that really targeted a law firm that has done great work in our community, Perkins Coie. And just, if you haven't looked at the executive orders, that's one to look at. It's just so mean and spiteful. Congress isn't allowed to behave that way. It's unconstitutional. It's called a bill of attainder. I don't know if there's an equivalent for the executive branch to target out a single place of business in the way that he's done. But it is meant to inspire fear. And we cannot let that happen. I do want to talk, though, for a minute about the cause behind the fear for the immigrant and refugee community. And in preparing for this talk, I went over and I tried to find as many instances of executive orders as I could that do target the immigrant and refugee community, just to just give you a sense of what the landscape looks like. So the first one that came out, one of the first ones that came out, was really just to activate Trump's promise to engage in mass deportations. And in that, he created a daily and a weekly target now for ICE arrests. He's doing things like getting the FBI engaged in law enforcement, which has never happened before, and I appreciated your highlighting that, and the work that this congregation is doing to make sure that the FBI remembers that it is a law enforcement agency and it has a public safety obligation. This is not part of it. Because people who are here, even without documents, are not criminal. And in fact, the rate of committing crimes among non-citizens is far lower than among citizens, native-born Americans. Trump and his administration withdrew a policy that provided safety for churches, schools, and hospitals. And so now actions, deportation and removal actions, can happen in those three institutions. I do have a piece of paper that's out there if you want. It has QR codes for all the deeper information about what I'm talking about. And there's a QR code for places of worship. And it does have some practical tips on how to make sure that your house of worship is protecting people who are here and how you're protecting yourselves. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. On that ability to enforce in churches, but it's only for specific denominations. It's for Quakers, Cooperative Baptists, and Sikhs. So it doesn't yet apply to all places of worship. Trump has tried to shut down the Mexican border, and in fact, crossings are way, way down. They were starting to be way, way down even before he did any of this. He's militarizing the border. He's reinstating the Remain in Mexico policy that he had during his first term, where he's forcing asylum seekers to go back to Mexico once they've gotten their application submitted and wait. And he also shut down a program to alleviate some of the pressure on our asylum system called CBP One Mobile. That was one of his first actions, is to take that app away, and so many people lost their appointments who had been, again, dutifully waiting in line as much as they possibly could. Trump has suspended refugee admissions. People were caught coming to Alaska mid-flight, turned around. Families were not able to unify, even after, again, months and years of planning. And I do just want to also say that most refugees have spent an average of 17 years in a refugee camp. 17 years. And so at the last minute, to be turned around, can you imagine how devastating that is for people who are here, who want to reunify, or people, where do they go? They've sold all their things, or they've gotten rid of all their things in the camps that they were preparing to leave. These actions have extraordinarily real consequences, not only for people halfway around the world, but for their family members here. Trying to end birthright citizenship. So it is really important that we recognize that a form of citizenship is by virtue of the fact that we were born on US soil. He wants to get rid of that too. And so far there's an injunction that's preventing him from doing that. We will see what happens with that. He's using Guantanamo Bay as a detention center. He's using C-17 and C-30 fighter jets to transport people to these detention centers and to other countries who are willing to take folks. That's at huge expense to us, huge, like billions of dollars that we are paying as taxpayers. He's enlisting the help of state and local law enforcement agents to help with the mass deportation efforts that he's doing. Thankfully, we live in a city where we have a fantastic chief of police who has been really talking about the need not to engage and how that deters from his core mission of public safety, And we've had conversations with the police chief in Juneau as well, who agrees with that. We need local municipalities, we need local cities, we need the state, which we're not going to get under this current governor, but we need local municipalities and local law enforcement, again, to stand up and say we are not going to be conscripted into this evil process. And evil, I think, is one of the better words for it. He's also increased expedited removal, and that's a pretty technical process that maybe doesn't have super application in Alaska, but generally, if you were within a few miles of a border, you could be quickly gotten deported. It took a lot more if you made it into what's called interior United States. But he's extended the border of that and also the time frame involved. So it used to be, I think, 3 or 4 days if you were in a border zone that you could be deported immediately. Now it's it's months. So he's just making it a lot easier to engage in immigration enforcement. We also passed and signed the first congressional action on immigration in quite a while called the Lake and Riley Act, which is really important because, again, it gives state and local law enforcement more authority to make sure that the Trump administration's wishes on immigration are adhered to. He's requiring undocumented people to register. It's been dormant in US law for quite a while, but it's come back around. He's terminated humanitarian parole. That really impacts on Alaska because we do have a big Ukrainian population here and an Afghan population who are going to definitely be impacted by that. We also have Venezuelans here, and they were the first on the termination list. And he's revoking temporary protected status for a lot of people. There's currently 17 countries in the US who are designated as eligible for temporary protected status. He's going to get rid of all of that. In Kodiak, Alaska alone, when I was practicing immigration law a couple of decades ago, there were 1,000 people there from El Salvador who are on temporary protected status. That was 2 decades ago. They're still here, same status, so many years later, and poof, by tomorrow, they could be here without documents. And then most recently, I read on Friday that Trump is planning to reinstate the travel ban. And I think hopefully we all remember that, because that was really, I think, a cathartic moment for activists and concerned citizens and concerned residents in Trump 1, when he turned people around and again forbade people coming in depending on the country that they were from. So that's the landscape that we're facing for our immigrant and refugee neighbors and friends and family members. So what can we do? How can we make sure that we're not obeying in advance? Again, please take a look at this because it goes into a lot more detail. And also, if you want information about what we're doing, I left these out at the front table as well. All you need to do is give us your name and your email if you want to be added to a list that we will then send you action alerts. And we do work very closely too with our partners in different coalitions. And so there are coalitions that have strengthened as a result of this. But the 5 ways that you can help is to educate yourself. So continue to come to events like this, continue to read the paper, continue to be analytical and critical thinkers about the information that you're absorbing. Advocate, continue to talk to your representatives, to talk to Senator Murkowski's office, but don't forget about the state representatives too, because they need to know. And we have a bipartisan coalition in our legislature, which hopefully will not harm people. Because even though we may not have a governor who would be sympathetic, we have potentially a legislature. You can donate. There are a lot of organizations who are really hurting right now because, again, philanthropies are turning their back. So it's really important, if you can't volunteer, if you can't spend time, if you can't afford to donate, do that, especially to local organizations and people doing work here. And then the last thing I would say is to make sure that you live your values. So I want to talk for a minute before I go to that. How am I doing on time?
You're a little over.
Oh, shoot. All right. Okay. I won't talk so much about this, but I do urge you to take a look at it because, again, it will teach you about how you can advocate and not be afraid that you're going to get arrested It'll talk to you about what you can do as a church or a hospital if you work in a church or hospital or a school system. So please make sure you take a look at that. In terms of living your values, though, and then I'll end. Anne Applebaum, who is a fabulous thinker in times like this, she just wrote a piece sharing her observations about the meeting at the White House with Trump, J.D. Vance, and Zelensky. And what she said is, in just a few minutes, the behavior of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance created a brand new stereotype for America. Not the quiet American, not the ugly American, but the brutal American. And I just want to sort of close with some thoughts. A quote by Elie Wiesel, of course, that the opposite of hate is indifference. It is really important, and I know that the people in this room are not indifferent, because you came here today. I know that we feel so deeply, it's in our DNA, that even if we ourselves haven't lived an immigrant or a refugee experience, our families have. Our story is one of fleeing and one of finding. It's one of loss and one of gratitude. Not all of our family members made it here safely, but you did. Those of us who are here, who are able to engage today, it's only because we came here and we were welcomed. We were welcomed by people who didn't know us, and now it's our turn. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions real quick? Okay, we'll move on then. Okay, well, thank you, Rob.
And that's not a dig, it's because I'm like, there's a lot going on. Hi, Rose O'Hara Jolly, they, them pronouns. I am the state director at Planned Parenthood Alliance Advocates, which means that I oversee all of our advocacy work, elections, legislative, state, federal, school boards, our grassroots efforts on coalitions with partners. So just a little piece, just some part-time work. So I am here. I actually am going to talk more about what we think is going to happen than what has happened so far. I know so many executive orders, the first attacks. So we are the statewide provider of abortion care and gender affirming care, in addition to all of the other reproductive health care that we provide. So we also do follow the attacks on the LGBTQ plus community because we provide life-saving health care. And so the first attacks that we have seen coming out of the executive were attacks on specifically our trans siblings in the community. And in very classic this presidency, poorly written, extremely poorly written, which makes them hard to interpret and enforce in their lawsuits against those. But we anticipate more attacks on the LGBTQ plus community, on abortion, on birth control. So I'm going to speak to a few things that we believe will happen because they told us. So when people tell you, believe them. They wrote it in Project 2025. So first and foremost, these are in a timeline order, not in a level of chaos or importance order. So first we have the attacks on Medicaid, which, I also want to preface that I think of this in two buckets as what they can do and what they will do. Because I get a lot of people like, but that's illegal, or the Congress. And I'm like, I think they don't care. So looking towards this Medicaid funding, so they want to defund Medicaid. That would be drastic. And quite frankly, this is life-saving care that people on Medicaid are getting. Almost half of our patient base are on Medicaid. So they use that to access their reproductive health care in addition to all the other health care. I'm really optimistic that at least Medicaid will be funded for another year through the Congress. We could potentially see a carve out. So Senator Murkowski supports Medicaid funding. She knows that it is life-saving funding for people in her state. We could see Senator Sullivan do what's called a carve out potentially, where he guarantees funding for Alaska, but all the other states lose it. So not an acceptable, not acceptable from our standpoint. Other attacks on Medicaid that we could see, so there's a program called Title X. So if you ever were maybe, came to Planned Parenthood and you were like, I couldn't afford care and I got it for free, the federal government actually paid for that. It's called Title X, and we would bill them like we do Medicaid or private insurance for that care. The last Trump administration kicked us out of that program. So how they did that was they said, if you even mention the word abortion, you are no longer eligible for Title X funding, and that is unacceptable to us. So we expect them to do that again, to take us out of Title X. They haven't gotten around to it, but they already did it and the courts upheld it, so we have budgeted in anticipation of losing that program for our health center sides. But they could do something like that with Medicaid. And what they're really trying to do when it comes to abortion is they are trying to reach into access states. They were completely, in my opinion, lying when they said we want to leave this up to the states. And now that they are in charge of the federal branch, they are doing everything that they federally can, we believe, to reach into those access states. And one very nefarious way, this is also like me, I think very doom and gloom. I'm like, if I was a horrible person, what would I do? And so they could do something like that with Medicaid and say that, access states who are providing abortion, can't have this Medicaid funding. And so that is to hurt the poorest people in access states, right? But then even unaccessed states like Idaho, we do provide, when patients come to Planned Parenthood in Idaho, we refer them, to Washington. So that would mean that even states that don't have abortion access, Planned Parenthoods would be losing funding in those states as well, because we will not tell people their healthcare options. I saw.
Can you just clarify what access is?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Yes. So access states are states that still have access to abortion. And then then there's the other states that have banned abortion in different ways inside those states. So Alaska is an access state. Thank you for that. We have a constitutional right to access an abortion that has been upheld by our Supreme Court, that it specifically does count in abortion. So we actually have an incredibly strong constitutional protection to abortion. That doesn't mean it was ever equal access, right? People in rural Alaska, people in unsafe relationships, they don't have the same access as other people have. And so these are ways that we can see them coming into our state to try to get access denied to abortion. And the cover would be where they would say things like, we didn't federally ban it. They would not federally ban it, but they would make it completely impossible to provide that care. Which leads me to the next one that is very scary, which is called the Comstock Act. Okay, I like that people have heard about the Comstock Act. So the Comstock Act is over 100 years old. It basically said you can't send pornography through the mail. And so what we believe they might do is completely radically reinterpret that to cover abortion. And so what that would mean is that nothing to provide abortion care could travel through the mail. That means the gown that you are wearing, the table that you are on, potentially the pen that you signed your consent form with. So completely, again, not outlawing abortion access, but making it completely logistically impossible to provide. We are very concerned about that. That is just, we are thinking through and trying to think through ways that potentially, but there is no way that fixes for every state, right? And that's really what everyone deserves. Everyone deserves the same access to care, regardless of who they are, where they live, where they were born. And so the Comstock Act is incredibly scary, and again, so reaching in to access states and saying absolutely not. And then if the courts uphold that interpretation, what else could be considered obscene? What other supplies and resources, and not only healthcare, but food, just all of these different things that cross state lines potentially could be reinterpreted by the Comstock Act. So, on to birth control. We also anticipate attacks on access to birth control, maybe not even through the executive, but through the Congress as well. You saw everywhere that abortion, it's funny because it's like everywhere that abortion was on the ballot, abortion won, and I'm like, well, Trump was on the ballot and Trump won, so, but it's because of the misinformation and the lies, right? Like, people genuinely believed him that he thought it should be up to the states. And so they were like, yeah, great, I'm gonna vote for him, but everywhere that's had abortion ballot measure, abortion has won. And I would, the caveat, Florida technically lost. I am from Florida. 58% of the voters wanting abortion access, I see as a win, as I've watched the blue state that I grew up in turn bright, bright red. You know, they recently made the threshold 60% from 50 because Florida was like, whoa, 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 you don't get to govern yourself. We hold that power. Yeah, Florida, we're working on becoming ungovernable, so they'll get back there. So birth control access, we do anticipate that there will be attacks on your ability to access birth control, right? You know, and all of this chaos, this, you know, like rapid fire salt shot. I grew up in the South, got politely told to get off some farms as a child by salt, but anyways. They want us to be afraid, right? And they want us to be insular, and they want us to crawl into whatever the privileges that we have, you know, crawl back into it, be quiet, be complacent. And when they're doing these things, right, when they're taking away abortion access, when they're taking away birth control, when they probably will take away gay marriage, you know, these are all things that they're hoping to do. Those are things, too, that the Supreme Court indicated in their overturn of Roe, that they thought, hey, bring us some of these cases, we'd love to relook at these, is because they want to take away what's so beautiful about being a human, right? When they make us forget that love is pleasure, right? And that pleasure is love, and that being human, and like those are what's magic and special about us as humans, right? And so if they make it scary, if you make it, well, I can't have, you know, I can never love another person the way I want because what if I get pregnant and I can't go to college, right? I don't have access to birth control. Like it takes away what's so magic, right? And so when that happens, then you become more insular, you become more afraid, and it becomes a cycle. Right? We already have taken away, you know, currently in the state of Alaska, there is not sex education. Our affiliate was the only provider, as far as I know, and because of Title X cuts that Trump did, we actually no longer have an education department in the state of Alaska. There are no requirements statewide. We do have a bill, Senator Gray Jackson brought it, right? But we have like a whole generation, now I know I'm going on, but like when I talk to like young people in the state, like a lot of them say, like, I didn't even know I could be pregnant because I didn't know I had sex because no one told me what sex was. And when my like boyfriend wanted to do this, I still thought that I was fine because they just like legit didn't know. And some of the things these kids are hearing on the internet, wild, you know, and so, but I will leave with like hope, right? Like all of the things I just said that might happen, like are made by people, right? Mostly men, but by people. And every single bad thing that these people are building and have built, we can unbuild. We can dismantle, we can take it apart, and we can build it anew. Like this is not ordained. These are people making decisions, and we can come together as people and make different decisions for our communities. And I like wholeheartedly believe that because we've seen it throughout history, right? Like you said, like my family fled, you know, different places and came here. Like they are resilient. Like I am the child of resilience. Like my family went through it, and my parents actively work through their trauma to make sure that I had a better life. And I stand up here not just because of them, but because of all those people before me who fought for me as a queer person, as someone born female, as someone born real poor in the deep South, to be where I am right now, like is a miracle. And that's because people who never, ever, ever were gonna meet me fought for me. And I am planning to stay here in Alaska and do that for someone's kid that I will never meet in the future. Like, because I want them to have better than I had. And if I have to go through some tough times right now, like, I'm gonna do it and I'm gonna make through it. And we're all gonna be here for those kids. So, thank you. Are there questions to my doomsday?
Talk about the mifepristone.
Thank you.
lawsuit.
Yes, okay, sorry.
Can you also repeat the question as well?
Yes, so Joelle is doing my job better than me, to talk about the mifepristone lawsuit. It was funny because I was like, I'm forgetting something else horrible, but I can't remember what it is. So really quickly, there's a couple lawsuits, actually. So one is around mifepristone. So mifepristone is the first medication in the 2 medications you take for a medication abortion. And the second medication is widely used kind of for other purposes, but the first one is pretty exclusively used as an abortifacient. And so there is a lawsuit saying that the FDA wrongly approved this medication, a medication that has been used for like over 30 years for this specific purpose. So we've got a lot of research that shows that it's actually safer than Tylenol, which can be purchased over the counter, safer than a lot of things that we take all the time. It's incredibly safe, and they're saying that the FDA should have never approved it, and so outlawing mifepristone. So that's another way, reach into the banned, or into the access states by taking away the medication. We see more and more now, over 50% of abortions are medication abortions. So I will say that currently, right now, it is completely legal for you to go online and order on the internet mifepristone, medication abortion, and get it mailed to you, or your friends, or anyone who might need it, should it become illegal. Yeah. Nope. Yeah. And it's totally legal. It's just like, you can do that right now for you to be able to, like, there's no law in the state of Alaska. Again, right? Don't do it if, you know, don't give them that. Yeah.
You know, you always hear about the trans or the men or the much money that is being spent on these. Instead of, it's such a small portion of what is Medicaid or what is insurance.
Yeah.
You never hear exactly, okay, this is like 1% of all healthcare that is being spent on this.
Yeah, it's a small percentage of the care that we provide, absolutely. Like, the overwhelming majority of what we do is birth control and like exams. But it's been politicized on purpose, right?
It come out that it's just such a small dollar amount.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
You mentioned that there's restrictions on birth control, proposed restrictions. I hadn't heard much about that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it's definitely, we've heard that there is rumblings in Congress to, you know, there's, again, it's like, what can they do and what will they do, right? So also, if they win this mifepristone case and like saying the FDA was wrong, then that opens the door, like, what else can they say the FDA was wrong about, you know? And what other medications can the FDA decide? And there also was like a change in the FDA. It was like another court case that gave the administration more control over the FDA, which was supposed to govern itself, which is the Food and Drug Administration that decides like what we can eat and what medicines we can take. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any, I would say, is any of this happening at the state level rather than just the national level, or was we heard a little bit louder?
Yeah, so that is another thing that I forgot to say, which is that we're in a cognitive dissonance here because the federal government, the Congress, and the administrative branch, and the judiciary all intend to attack Planned Parenthood health centers. And then our state house is pro-reproductive health care. We have the majority caucuses in both the House and the Senate. So you might not have noticed in the chaos, but last year our legislature was heck bent on attacking trans kids all day, every day. Not a single peep this time around, because the House majority is just like, absolutely not, like, we're not doing that. And so then we also have pro-repro health trifectas, right? So Assembly, School Board, and Mayor in Juneau, Anchorage, and Fairbanks Borough. Fairbanks, I used to live in Fairbanks, so I can talk bad about it. The borough has all three, not inside the city limits, but that means that we have so much potential, not just in our people power to fight this, but in people in positions of power. The legislature in Alaska is the one who decides Medicaid funding, not our governor. So we do have like a lot of tops to grassroots, like abilities to protect a lot of people in this state.
I used Planned Parenthood as my welfare. I used my insurance there. And I will admit that I did it presuming that if every time I went in and I used it and I used my insurance there, that it meant that there were resources that could go back into the organization to take care of people who didn't have that level of privilege and access. Is that an accurate perception?
Yeah.
Not that I'm suggesting, but if every woman here said, oh, you know what, I can make a Planned Parenthood my primary care for things guys would call it to a vote, or not.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like every patient that we get, like our patient volume, so just like a little in the weeds of how that helps is, let's say we have 8 appointments, but only 4 people come. We still paid our doctor that same salary for the day. We still paid our rent the same for that day. Our electricity is still the same that day. So,
So
and
insurance is paying, like it's not being an issue.
yeah.
That's what I want to hear.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah.
I know maybe slightly out of, it's still under the umbrella of reproductive care, but it may be out of your specialty of watching, but there's also lots of talk about trying to limit IVF sciences
Yes.
and access to that. Is that, I know that we're all kind of watching all the different balls.
Yeah.
Are you guys tracking?
We are very concerned, yes. There's just so much we're very concerned about. It's hard to fit it in 20 minutes. And that's a great, okay, so that leads into another thing, right, of like, what is an abortion? When does life start, right? Like all of these questions, which we did see with IVF, right? Like that is an embryo, they see it as life, right? And so another thing to note is that miscarriage management and abortion are the same procedure. So when they outlaw abortion, they are also outlawing miscarriage management. And we are seeing people who can get pregnant, we are seeing pregnant people, we are seeing women die in states because of this. It's really scary and really awful, and just that further, like they are coming for your ability to be in charge of your own body and your ability to decide how you make your family, when and if. So absolutely, and it's all like that one bucket. Yeah. Beck, yeah.
I don't know if this is like a question, I could just kind of formulate this in my head. So I'm a woman who's experienced infertility. I have friends who have as well. I've never needed an emergency D&C due to a miscarriage, but I have friends who have and been denied care at Providence because of who they're affiliated with. So I'm wondering to like what extent you guys are also educating about that, because I've found that a lot of my friends who've been through that don't know that they could be denied care simply because of where their provider is associated with.
Yeah. Catholic. Yeah. That is out of my realm and scope. I will just be honest. Yeah, I mean, and on that note too, you just reminded me, like when I say people who can get pregnant, it's not just trans inclusive, it's because there are lots of people out there who want to be pregnant and are not, and that doesn't change their womanhood, right? This idea that to be a woman, the ultimate is to get pregnant, and that's not what it is, right? It's whatever you want to make it. So we need to make sure that we're seeing everyone in the stigma of miscarriage, of infertility, of abortion, like all of it needs to go. We all have bodies. They all betray us at some point, in different ways, and we need to be in community. Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Sorry,
I
you want me to-
remind everyone that there are people watching this via live stream. So speakers could try to state summarize
Yeah.
questions
Oh my gosh.
that are being asked, because the mic doesn't always pick them up.
Thank you, and I even was reminded that, and then I didn't do it, and I'll do better now. Thank you.
This is something we're speaking on NPR, and unfortunately, I was listening driving, and so I don't have it as accurate as I would like to, because I'm bringing it up now. It was a case about, the pro-life people being very
So this is a reference to a court case that happened around clinic safety and protesters at our clinics. This is not my area of specialty, but I do know broadly what this is about, because I do know a lot about policy. But this was basically like, we have kind of like buffers around our buildings, that it's like, that's not a free speech zone, you know, like most of the world is, but you can't like just be at our door screaming at patients. And this court case said no more. And so basically giving permission like ahead of time for people to escalate towards our health center staff and patients. Yeah. Not now, thank you. Coming from the South, like I actually think it's really chill here. I'm like, whoa, you know? Like a couple people with signs on the sidewalk, and in Fairbanks, people would call me and they'd be like, why are they protesting the Denny's or whatever, you know? Because it's like there's fast food chains in front of the building we're in, and so people are just like very confused all the time. So, you know, they can't get close. The health center that we had the most issues with, strangely enough, was Juneau. And Soldotna. Both of those health centers are closed now. So we currently have Planned Parenthoods in Anchorage and Fairbanks. So
you're not right now in a place where you need escorts, but if that changes, will you reach out to our rabbi or?
yeah, I will. Hopefully it doesn't change, you know. The majority of Alaskans support abortion access. 68% of Alaskans support sex ed. Like, you know, even in Republican districts, people support abortion access in Alaska. So, and they vote on it, and we know that. That's why we have trifectas in our 3 major cities, and in the House and Senate, because it is important. There's also another court case really quick. It's called the False Claims Act. The judge in Texas, the one they planted there, the federal judge, to push all the cases through. The state of Texas is saying that our affiliate there did $1.something billion of Medicaid fraud, which is holistically, completely untrue. And the evidence shows that. Medicaid's like, no. And so they're trying to bankrupt our national office. Like that is $1.something billion is a picked bankruptable number, which also goes to donations. Make sure you're donating locally. A lot of people donate to our national office. If you don't, it doesn't stay here then. It goes to DC. So if you want to be donating locally, you can Google Planned Parenthood Alliance Advocates or Planned Parenthood Great Northwest Hawaii, Alaska, Idaho, Kentucky, and Indiana. Great. Any other questions? Anything else I egregiously missed, Joelle? Thank you. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, Rose. And next up is Joelle. Thank you, Joelle.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joelle Hall. I'm the president of the Alaska AFL-CIO. I think you know, Carolyn, she's my ride or die back there. So the American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations, and we are the umbrella organization of most of America's unions. I am the elected representative of Alaska's AFL-CIO. We represent about 50,000 working people in the state of Alaska. And we have almost every union in Alaska under our banner, notable exceptions, NEA Alaska, Police Department, and some correctional officers. But what I'm here to talk about today is federal government workers. So we have a small number of federal government workers relative to state employees in the state of Alaska's context, right? They are largely represented by one union, the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. So public employee unions, in the state of Alaska, they're largely AFSCME, which some of you may know that acronym, and the American Federation of Teachers. So those are our big public employee unions in the state of Alaska, but all public employee unions are organized and protected kind of in the similar way, and it's different than a private sector union. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about that because they're coming after both, as you might imagine. So let me talk about private sector unions first. And when I say private sector union, what I mean is the IBEW or the laborers, or I'm in the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. When people in those lines of work seek a union or get represented by their union, their organizing and their grievance path is through the National Labor Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Board is integral, imperative to successful union organizing, now you're going to get why they're going after it, and to the adjudication of unfair labor practices, wage theft, all of the things that can happen to people in a private sector union that they can allege that their employer is doing to them, that their union would then take up the stream, right, to the top, the NLRB. One of the first things they did at the NLRB is they fired the executive director, Jennifer Burzo. That's what, actually within the realm of, the things that he can do relatively quickly. But then he went one step further and he fired a woman named Gwen Wilcox. He has no right to fire Gwen Wilcox. She is in a term until 2028. The National Labor Relations Board has to have 3 members actively working in order to meet quorum. They were at 2. So this is by design, right? If you don't have a quorum, then you can't help new unions organize. You can't deal with unfair labor practices. You can't go after bad actor employers. You can't do any of that stuff when the NLRB is not functioning. So it was this week that Gwen Wilcox won her lawsuit at the Supreme Court. So now we will have Gwen Wilcox back and the NLRB is back and functioning. So that is on the private union side, right? This is all to try to squelch private union organizing, it's Amazon, Starbucks. Think of the people who wrote him a check. Those are the people who have to go through the National Labor Relations Board and who are facing their own employees with that drive to organize and to get representation in their workplace. So we were able to stop at least that one thing. Now let's go over to the public sector. The public sector is protected kind of in 2 ways. One, you've heard about it recently in the news. It's the Merit System Protection Board for federal workers. Of course, so does their collective bargaining agreement, right? Every single public employee walks into, for most, at least in the state of Alaska, you walk into a job that is represented, unless you are the slim majority of Alaskans who work in the public sector who work in an unrepresented position. They are there for a number of reasons, but most state employees actually are represented. They're represented by AFSCME or by AFT, the supervisory union, or the confidential employees. So if you walk into those jobs, you have a bargaining agreement. That bargaining agreement's been in existence probably in this state since the 40s. And so the onboarding of a new employee, there are rules clearly stated. How long are you on probation? What do you do? This is how you do things. This is the pay and benefits and working conditions bargained for you by your union. This is how you get promoted. This is your cause should you feel you're being retaliated against. All of these things are laid out in your collective bargaining agreement. What is common practice is that people in their probationary periods are not yet really, they're covered, like pseudo-covered by their collective bargaining agreement. It's often mentioned, but what he's gone and done, the first thing he's tried to do is to go get those people who are not clearly protected by a union yet and just fire them right off with no cause whatsoever, right? We've seen that. Probationary. He's caught a couple other people who don't fit that category, as we all know. But the trick is you have to have standing to sue in this regard. So I looked up there, the New York Times has a lawsuit tracker, and if you ever want to, I can't decide if it makes me feel better or worse when I read the lawsuit tracker, but in the lawsuit tracker, there are currently, in the civil servant bucket alone, there are 19 lawsuits. Some of it's an individual, but oftentimes it is the American Federation of Government Employees who is the litigant against the Trump administration, is the litigant against the Office of Personnel Management, is the litigant. So these unions are being asked to, and expected to, rightly, sue this government on every single front. And I want to talk a little bit about bankruptcy. Because inside the federal system, you can be a beneficiary of that contract. You can be a beneficiary of those working conditions. You can get that health care, and you do not have to pay to be in a union. So a fraction of the people who benefit from that, who benefit from all of that, actually pay their union dues. Well, it is that fraction and the money that they've contributed that is now the funding source of all of these lawsuits. So right to work itself, these types of attacks, they are an attempt to deplete the resources of the union because there's only so much money these people have in reserve when they're already having to represent people who don't pay their way, right? In my little world, impolitely, we call them freeloaders. Not sorry about that, because they're getting, it's like thinking you can belong to the Alaska Club just because you live in the neighborhood without paying your way. No, it doesn't work like that. So I'm worried about AFGE. I'm worried about their ability, but a lot of times they're doing this in coalitions with other unions because not everybody can afford what this is going to cost. Not everybody can afford to go to the Supreme Court in 6 different lawsuits in the same year. So the AFL overall, Liz Schuler is the president of the American Labor Movement. We're having weekly calls about what's happening to our brothers and sisters in the public sector, the federal government workers, and of course, all of the other things, because we are a social justice, civil rights organization at our core. And so this is the lane in which we are prescribed to fight. It is not the only thing we care about, but we are fighting mightily. You may not have heard last week, and I hope I'll get there. Do you have a question? Okay. Last week, there's a name I want you guys to remember, because I swear to God, if there's a GoFundMe for this man, I'd give him some money right now. His name's Hampton Dellinger. Hampton Dellinger is an inspector general, and Trump fired him. He went to court and protected his job, and he got a stay. And in 1 month on the job, saved the jobs of 6,000 people at USDA. And then he tapped out. He's like, you probably have the right to fire me, President Trump. I just needed a month to protect all these other people. There are these people out there doing Herculean tasks to protect the people who go to work every day and just try to make our country run. And I really, I think every day about Hampton Dellinger and the bravery of one man, because it's an example of what we can, we're not all inspector generals, but we all have a role to play, and I'll get to that later. Also this week, Trump removed the collective bargaining rights of the people who work for the TSA. Barack Obama gave them that through the executive order because it was not part of, when they were created by Congress, they were not given collective bargaining rights when they were created by Congress in the Bush administration, right? So Barack Obama came in and gave them collective bargaining rights. The president just took away their collective bargaining rights. So we've got work to do when we get a better Congress to protect those thousands of workers, because you can imagine the amount of abuse they get in their job. I will admit having had occasionally a hostile thought towards a TSA worker on occasion. Not my finest moment, not their fault. Just maybe it's me. But they need rights on the job. They are exposed to people who get very, very angry and who in a dangerous situation. How many of you have, I already asked the rabbi, he answered yes. How many of you have ever heard of the book Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein? Okay. At the risk of depressing you further, I'm going to suggest that you read this book, because this attack on immigrants, this attack on reproductive rights, this attack on, let's face it, they're attacking public employees because the underlying systems that they serve and make work every day are things that people want to try to do for money. They want to privatize these institutions. So what we're up against here is a group of oligarchs, some of whom are religiously motivated, okay, and some of them are just flippin' greedy. And they think there's money to be made in National Park Service. I do not know how they think they're gonna possibly make that pencil, but somehow they think that Americans are gonna pay like $100 to go into these places. Can you imagine what it would cost to actually go into the parks that we are benefit to have in our state? What it would cost if we had to pay full freight for the management of those parks, plus a profit margin, what it would cost you as a citizen to access those things. But breaking everything all at one time and selling it for parts is a proven strategy done all over the globe. And shock doctrine is a terrifying book that annotates every single time this has been done. And what is the outcome? You get a privatized electric grid. You get in Mexico, in Puerto Rico, you end up with really, really bad services because the profit model doesn't work for everything. There is no profit model in a national park. There is no profit model in delivering. When we deliver healthcare for a profit, we see how that's working out for us, right? This is like, what is all this madness about? This is what all this madness is about. It's about rich people getting richer at the expense of our national treasures and our community and our assets. If they get rid of the people, then the thing gets broken, and then they're like, well, the thing is broken. And, well, we should just sell this off to my friend, Elon. And then Elon will run the thing, right? So this is just as transparent as the day is long. Privatization is a ritualistic thing that the right wing tends to bring up in the face of public sector unions in particular. They don't like the idea that public employees have a right to what they say about their wages, their benefits, and their working conditions. But more importantly, they know that the unions that represent these workers are powerful, and they can move people of Congress, and they can stand up. And so they want to bankrupt these unions so that they are less powerful, so that it becomes this cycle where we lose power in the eyes of our lawmakers, right? So we don't have the ability to stand up. So I want to talk a little bit about that next, because I want you guys to think back to where we were in 2020, when we, 2018 maybe, when we elected this idiot governor. What happened? This is like deja vu all over again. Does this feel familiar what's happening here? Because he tried this exact same thing on the state of Alaska in 2018. He tried to fire every public employee that didn't have a collective bargaining agreement, asked them to reapply for their job, unconstitutional. He tried to go after everybody on every way, on every format, all at the same time, all at once. He was not successful. And then ultimately out of that was born the recall, and if it were not for the pandemic, we would have been recalled. So I want you to think about that moment where Alaskans kind of stood together and said, who is this clown? And what is he trying to do to our state? Unacceptable, we won't have it. We're all gonna lock arms, and it doesn't matter whether I'm about public radio, or I'm about SNAP benefits, or I'm about this, or I'm about that. We all locked arms, and we all stood up, and we all pushed back. And by and large, even though he had majorities in both bodies, and this is the really important part of this conversation today, Mike Dunleavy had a Republican House and a Republican Senate. They were unable to do his mischief. And they were unable to do his mischief because we all got together and started burning up their little phones, making their lives really miserable, and that is our task. Our task is we have to make people's lives miserable. Those people's names are Dan Sullivan, Nick Begich, and Lisa Murkowski. Lisa could use a little backup. You know, She's never perfectperfectly right in Joelle's worldview, but I'll take a 60%er in this particular case versus the 0%er standing behind her, hiding. So I'm not going to violate your 501c3 rules here, but I'm doing it anyway. So it is imperative that people get disappointed in Lisa when she does the wrong thing once and ignore him when he does the wrong thing every stinking time. So lift your gaze up, adjust your focus. He has to be made aware, he has to feel us. The way we made Mike Dunleavy feel us, he has to feel us. And Nick Begich, oh Lord have mercy. Ted Stevens is rolling over in his grave right now. Oh, Alaska to stand on its own. It doesn't need any federal dollars. I'm like, I think you missed the memo. I think you missed a memo. We know for sure that that is not how Alaskans feel. We know for sure that we are the steward of many, many, many acres, millions of acres of federal land. We know that we are this great state because we have a partnership with the federal government. And Rose was talking a little bit about Medicaid. We are in a coalition with all of the large communities about this issue of Medicaid, because I want to make it really clear that it is not just the stakes of the people who actually receive Medicaid, which is bad enough, right? That's who you're going after. That's who you're deciding to pick on. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I'm like, the soulless vision that represents. If you live in a community off the rail belt, you have a rural hospital in Nome, Bethel, Kotzebue, Ketchikan, Sitka, Juneau, Wrangell, maybe even Kenai. If these full cuts go through, those hospitals will probably close. So this isn't just about the one person or the people in that community, that it's bad enough that they would be going after them. This is about every other person being denied care. Every other person in the community gets denied care with it. Because Medicare is a foundational block. Because so many people are on Medicare in Alaska. And you got to ask yourself, why is that the case? If you are willing to admit that America has the highest healthcare costs in the world, I don't think that's a debatable point. I think we all know that to be true. Alaska has the highest healthcare costs in America. This is the most expensive place to procure healthcare on the planet. There is a reason why Medicaid is so well utilized here. Because our cost to get into the exchange, our cost to get into traditional healthcare is so much higher than it is any place else in this country. We are at a complete disadvantage, and that is why we have such a high percentage. Plus, tribal Medicaid is often a co-biller within Indian Health Service for services to Alaska Natives. So we have a big piece of healthcare that's delivered out there that is also paid for by Medicaid. Then, of course, you have the in-town stuff. But if you're living in a place like Wrangell or Ketchikan, think about how many people there cannot afford and what is their private healthcare options, right? If they don't work for the state of Alaska, does mom and pop even have private healthcare, right? This healthcare issue is intersectional to everybody, to literally every human being walking in the state of Alaska. Because if they cut Medicaid, people will still go to the doctor. They will be sicker when they go, and that uncompensated care will get paid for by anybody's private insurance that's left standing. This is not something where they take it out away and then it just goes away. Oh no, it's just pushing the peas around the plate. That's all that's happening. We're pushing the peas around the plate. It is immoral, it is nonsensical, and of course it's vicious. So this Medicaid fight, to me, is Dan Sullivan knows how to add. Pretty smart guy, it turns out. He knows how to add, and he knows what not having a hospital in Wrangell means to his constituents who live there. He is also a patriot. That's what he perceives himself to be. How many people in here ever served in the military? Okay, me, a few of us. If you were ever in the service of your country, I would urge you to make sure that you talk about that in your letter to him. Because I'm looking at the age, maybe except that nice gentleman in the back, all the rest of us who raised our hand, we served in a very specific time in American history where the world grew together to build something to take care of each other. And Dan Sullivan has got to decide whose side is he on. That is the question. It is the age-old question of the labor movement. It is the question of our time. Whose side are you on? And I know whose side I'm on. I'm on the side of everybody in this room. And who am I not on the side of? The billionaire with no elected office wreaking havoc on this country so that he can buy up this country for parts. No stinking way. And there is one person who actually has the ability to get to 53 votes in the US Senate to stop this madness. We are unlike any other state in the union where you couldn't ask that of a Republican. Well, Dan Sullivan, if Dan Sullivan isn't the 53rd vote, then he is not listening. And he needs to be that brave, and we need to hold him that accountable. So if you've written him once, thank you. Do it again. Call his office, leave a message. There has to be no reprieve from the pressure this man feels. Don't lull yourself into a false sense of worrying like this about what Lisa's gonna do. Go get the other guy. He's 53. She is the 50th vote. Then we have JD Vance. Oh my God. So we need the 51. We need 51, right? Yes, ma'am.
We've had an incredibly difficult time reaching anybody in Sullivan's office. Even one of our team members physically shows up there.
Yep.
She's still not getting anywhere. So do you know or have any advice about is he actually listening? Who do you reach?
Well, okay, reaching and listening are different things. And there's only one answer to your question, it's public shaming. You have to publicly shame him on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. You have to tag him on everything. You need to make his staff, because if you are doing this in the quiet of I sent a letter, you sent a letter, great. That's not public shaming. You have to publicly shame these people.
So I have a second piece too. Part of your risk is perhaps I'm a very active AFGC member.
Yes, thank you.
238, local 1110.
Yeah.
We have an issue of safety too. How do we do that and remain safe as federal employees? Obviously awkward time not representing the agencies that we're working with, but there are so many coworkers and colleagues of mine that are too scared to speak up. So what do you advise?
Well, I advise you, union member, to take my phone number, because what we can do together is I can talk about the things that are happening in your bargaining unit in a way that elevates them to the public so that it can get shared around. And I can make those representations on your behalf without having to put your specific name on it. This is why you have a union, right? And even your union's in a tricky spot, but the AFL-CIO is not in the same spot. AFSCME retirees are not in the same spot. We can do a lot of this type of agitation at a different level. Federal government employees just generally don't get involved in the agitation game. This is really uncharted territory for them. But if you're a state of Alaska employee, welcome to the war, because we've been at it for 20 years. So the answer is, we can publicly shame him for the things. He will say dumb things like, oh, nobody's contacted my office. And so it's really important if you have the ability to CC the Alaska AFL-CIO if you're a union doing union correspondence on behalf of your job, CC us. Because I need to be able to know that he's like, they can always, it is not, they wouldn't be the first lawmakers to ever be like, I haven't heard from anybody. Even though, of course, their phones are getting blown up. But we need a little proof. And I need to be able to say, if I've gotten copied on 30 letters, it means you got 300 letters. Tell me how you didn't get 300 letters on this. And so I'm going to give you my card before you leave. If you're a federal government worker, or if you know people in your family, the other thing we can do is listen to our sister say, she can't do it by herself with her name on it because she's going to get fired. We all have to be very, very vocal for our brothers and sisters in the community who say, this is what's happening on my job. And we have to hold it up and where's Dan? Where's Dan? Where's Dan? We have to call him on the carpet. He needs to be here. They do go on break next week. And he probably will find other things to do. But I did see something on Facebook that somebody's going to organize a town hall and ask him to attend.
Yeah.
The empty chair meeting, it's classic. A classic trope of the business, the empty chair meeting. But we have to write him. We have to publicly expose him. We have to, Lisa will stand there and say things. You will know where she stands on an issue. He just hides behind her skirt the entire time. And we need to say, where is Dan? She's brave, where is his bravery? Nick, I got no hope. Plus, it's a much larger margin, right, in the House. Like, you're not gonna actually get there in the House, but in the Senate is the only prayer we have for stopping this mayhem is one more vote in the Senate. So we're in the hunt for the guy that makes the difference. And so if you leave here knowing one thing today, is that we've got the one guy who can save the whole country. And he has never been brave yet. But he can be, and he should be, and if he doesn't, he's up in 2026. Yes, sir.
I agree with 1,000% what you say. And I know that you're kind of into the public shaming.
I am.
But there's the other side, because when we go after the shaming of these guys, they retreat, they get defensive, and they stop. Who's doing the other stuff, the other side?
The accountability side on the other side. So what's happening on the other side is, so it's interesting you bring this up because Rose and I have this conversation all the time. Because the advocacy world divides up into two buckets. The C3 people, they're very nice people. They run very important institutions. They have dignity. They go to board meetings. They're very important. They do not go into an office and engage in such behavior. They give them white papers and they tell them how bad this is going to hurt people. And they're very dignified. That's very important, and I'm so glad they're there. I am not one of those people. My job is to stand on the street corner and yell really loud and make these other people seem so reasonable. So this is a Mutt and Jeff show. It is bad cop, good cop, bad cop. So you be assured that every single hospital CEO in this entire state is sitting in Dan Sullivan's office going, oh my, you will bankrupt us at all. The entire legislature, the kick down downstream effects to Alaska on Medicaid alone is $250 million. We currently have a deficit in our budget of $300 million that we can't figure out how to fix. That's with a $1,000 PFD, a $1,400 PFD, and a $680 inside of the BSA. Government agencies the same. We're in the hole $300 million today. That's before Medicaid. Now we're in the hole $550 million. So the legislature, the hospital administrators, the people who work in every facet of healthcare, the doctors. And then if you think about all of the other ways that these downstream effects of the federal government, like think about the tourism industry is doing right now. Think about those people. What do you think Holland, America, and Royal Caribbean are doing right now? They're looking at their Alaska summer going, oh my, we are going to have cancellations. People are not going to want to come if they can't get into the parks. So I guess I always rest assured that the fancy people will find a way. They always find a way. They have that guy's cell phone anyway. I have a cell phone too, but I'm only going to use it when I really, really need it. And what I really want to do is make sure that regular people, he's got to feel the heat. Because these guys are giving him the polite way, right? He may or may not respond to the heat. Lisa likes to pretend like she doesn't respond, but she does listen. I've had this conversation with her, right? And she's really, I won't go on too much for it, but it's a really good question. The people who have an ox, like their ox is getting gored, their business is at stake, they're getting the meetings and they're having the polite conversation. That's not me. I have 50,000 members who are gonna be in trouble here, but I have a different job. So I'm trying to drag you into my side of the ledger. Rest assured the rich people find a way to talk to her, because that's their job.
I mean, that's part of the disconnect too, I think that we're feeling, is like some of us really believe in like nonviolent communication styles, right? Because on an individual level that reaches people. But with this type of structure and what we're dealing with, like I'm finding I'm questioning my own like pacifism. It's like, okay, it's not working. What works?
What was that code I just showed you? I'm gonna get my phone.
Another LED circle.
I'm over time. I gotta be quiet now. Okay, hang on. Okay, so I just saw this today on Facebook because, Facebook inspiration, why not? Let's look at this. Quote, also, Elie Wiesel, right? Wiesel. Okay, this is the quote. There may be times where we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time where we fail to protest. So that's the difference, right? Protest comes in lots of forms. You need not be as aggressive as I would be, but the letters you write, the way that you express your view of morality, patriotism, what does it mean to be a person who lives in this country? That matters, in particular to him. Like what is his deep-seated motivation? He's deeply motivated by his patriotic beliefs. And that is like, he's got a very specific way of viewing the world. I do too. I thought we were kind of like relatively unified in that. And what's happened is he's being dragged into a vantage point, into a perspective that I think is actually antithetical to his views. So how do we get him to come back to us? With that, you have to implore him. But he has to show up for his constituents. He can't just like stand in the Doge caucus and expect, because he did, and expect us not to react. Everybody's got to, okay, hi Glenn. Good, and then I'll come back to you and then I'll go there.
Speaking of making you feel the heat,
Yeah.
I know what electoral realities are statewide here, but are you having any success in creating people to run against him and against Nick in 2026?
What I will tell you is that the conversations are ongoing with a large group of people, trying to figure out how to take advantage of what we think will be a different environment than we might normally have. So yeah, it is constantly under discussion. I probably have a conversation about this once a week at least.
David and I both work strongly with indigenous communities and indigenous organizations. Do you have feedback about how his wife is Alaska Native, his daughter is from Alaska Native, Medicaid, looks to me like it's going to gut IHS as well. Do you have any information? I would go to organizations tribal communities know how to lean in a way that is necessarily not shaming, but also necessarily isn't.
Right.
Like, they have different
As far as I know nothing. Oh, yes, I will repeat the question. The question is, what is the tribal community, how is the tribal community engaging and responding?
How can we support them?
And the answer to that question is, I don't know. Because I've attempted to kind of reach out to leadership at ANMC, but I am assuming they fall squarely into the category that I was talking about earlier. They're having those conversations. I'm not in that meeting. Yeah. Yeah, so Rose says they're having that conversation, but you're talking about something different. And I would always be interested in trying to build a coalition that's bigger with the people who are the grassroots on the ground, the tribal people on the ground, to try to figure out how to communicate the story of the way this affects their daily life in a concerted and audible fashion, I guess is the way okay, one more, yes.
So I thought the quote you were going to say from Eloise Ellis, yesterday they came from this group, then they came from this group, and today they come from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if anyone here doesn't have echoes of the Holocaust, with what's happening, I think you're not really remembering that happened. Number two, I did get a letter from Nick Begich saying, our phones blew up, nobody could get on, but I thought that was good. I thought, yeah, that's a win. We blew up his phone. We've done it once, and he's acknowledged it. I thought that was kind of like our people. So I like your point about that's a good way to go. But three, I want to say the definition of a minority right now, if you look at Jews, Christians, Muslims, LGBT, elders, I can't even think of all this, students, teachers, parents, our PCAs are mostly from other countries. Where are we going to get those from? It's not a minority. That is a majority. But we're not necessarily working together, and that's the plus. It's going to be the majority.
Agreed. Peggy?
With Dunleavy.
Yeah.
And all of these cuts are going to hit Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
The federal workers and like you said, tourism.
Right.
Should we be sending letters to him too? Because I don't hear him coming out and saying, I saw an interview with him saying, oh, well, these federal workers are losing their jobs. They'll probably go back to work, and if they don't, they can apply for the state. We have jobs for it.
That's exactly what Begich told our group.
Oh, and I'm like, oh, give me a break. So should these letters not just be going to Sullivan, but should they be going to Dunleavy too?
Well, it can't hurt. It can't hurt. Rose talked about this earlier. I think everybody in this room is probably aware that we have bipartisan majorities in both bodies. And these are, generally speaking, coalitions organized around the kinds of values I hold. And, pro-public education, pro-pension, pro-trying to right the ship of the state of Alaska, and whatever Governor Dunleavy wants to do. So it would be, he's focused on something different, right? He's focused on what goodies can he get from Trump, right? And so he's focused on the goodies, and but it would be really important, if we have so many of our neighbors lose their jobs, it's going to be a huge effect on. We have a lot of jobs in the municipality, we have a lot of jobs at the state of Alaska, but, it's not the same. It's not the same. All right, I'm over time. Rabbi says I'm over time. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you so much to our speakers, really appreciate it. We have lots of food, so I encourage you to stay. And also, you're gonna notice a lot of tables, but not a lot of chairs. So please feel free to grab a chair from the sanctuary and move it to a table. And thank you again for coming, we really appreciate it, yes. The Korean wilderness, yeah, there they go.